Hello, everyone. This is the weekly Sig Docs meeting for Kubernetes. Today is October 3rd, 2017, and hope you're all having a wonderful week. I know that my week is better because 1.8 released last week. Yay! Many thanks to Steve Perry and to Jay Singer-Dumars who helped wrangle docs from contributors and get them all out the door. And many thanks also to Jennifer Rondeau and Radhika who wrangled the release notes. So do we have any new attendees, people who are new to this meeting?
This is Brad from IBM. I've tried to attend in the past, but I think this is the first time I've been able to attend consistently.
Welcome, Brad. Any other folks?
Hey, Ryan J here. I've attended once or twice in the past, but not very often, so just checking in.
Hi, Ryan. Nice to meet you. Other new folks? All right. Let's go to the agenda. 1.8 out the door. Yes. The retrospective is scheduled for this Friday, October 6th, if you need an invitation for that. I'm trying to think of the best way to do that. Jace says Thursday and Friday. Do you want to say more about Thursday and Friday, Jace?
Sure. So we basically learned from prior retros that an hour is just never long enough. So we're co-opting the community meeting for the first hour, and then doing another hour on Friday to make sure that we've got enough space. If we don't use it, then great. But I have a pretty strong inclination that this is going to be a very busy retro based on what happens.
I suspect you are correct. So the Kate's community meeting on Thursday, and then another hour on Friday dedicated to the retrospective.
Yep. Same time, same Zoom channel, same everything. So
awesome. And if you need any help getting an invitation or figuring out when those meetings and times are, you can ask in the Sig Docs channel, and folks will be happy to point you in the right direction. Jennifer, I have next on the agenda a 1.8 release note write-up. I want to, rather than go through all of it now, is there anything that you'd like to highlight in advance of going through this in the retrospective?
Well, I'm not planning on offering all of that content to the retrospective. It's pretty substantial. It'll be more like talking points. The retrospective write-up itself is much more succinct. But I was hoping, maybe folks can provide feedback in the doc. The two things that I highlight, and maybe what I need to do is simply flip the order because Caleb seems to have misunderstood what I was pushing on in his comments, are automation and better release note guidance. I see those things as two halves of the same coin, not as prioritized one over the other. I do think that Dawn's proposal, which I've also linked to from the doc, really outlines a larger approach to improving the release note process. It's not just about a better template. It's not just about editors or what have you. So, given that that's already been proposed and partly implemented, I thought it only appropriate to call out the work that people had already done to try to improve the process, and then add what I think writers can provide with help. In my experience, which is fairly substantial at the enterprise level with this kind of thing, it's not realistic to get final release note content in a feature write-up or an issue or a pull request. There's going to be human intervention at the end. I've never seen it work otherwise. If we can get to the point where we don't need that, great. But the other thing I tried to do in this doc that I just like to call out is I tried to put pieces of things in there so that we can implement in iterative fashion, because we're not going to get all of this in place for the next release.
Excellent. Thank you for putting all of this together in sort of a neatly browsable format. So yes, I highly recommend that everyone take some time to look over this. The content is good and very thoughtful. And also, Jennifer's asking for feedback on it. So if you look at it and you can think of ways to help improve our collective process for releases going forward, this is an excellent chance to provide feedback specifically on the release notes.
And especially anybody who's worked on this kind of content for similar or dissimilar projects, hearing about your experience would be really appreciated.
Awesome.
And I know we went through a big effort to revamp our release notes on the Google Cloud side, so I can share some of what we've learned from that.
That would be great.
We avoid any automation. So that might run contrary to what you're proposing.
I want to hear,
I'd love to fill you in on that. It's just like we started automating and discovered that we were automating a dumpster fire. So it's far better to have human intervention than and have human decisions of what should be surfaced in a release note. So
that's fundamentally what happened with 1.8.
Right, exactly.
Which is so I have some sense of that pain, but I would like to hear more. And Jace, I realize you're probably up to your ears, but if you find 5 or 10 minutes to touch base on this stuff again before the retrospective, that might help provide me with some context.
Yeah, there's some combination of tooling and process that needs to meet this need. So okay, yep.
Okay. And I'm going to dig into, I haven't looked at the automation scripts at all, so I need to do that too before Thursday. Thank you.
Zach, take it away. I'm just presenting notes.
Hey Zach, is there anything else that you need me around for, or do you mind if I split?
Jace, that is, I think that's all that we have or need from you. Thank you for coming.
Okay.
I
definitely.
Want to say one thing, Jace. Thank you so much for bugging engineers about documents.
Yes.
I know that I know Steve was doing sort of initial round, but your sort of tapping on people's shoulders and sending people emails was really useful. So thanks.
I'm so glad to help. I have the utmost respect for everything that this SIG does, and anytime I can do anything to help, I will do it. So,
fine. Thanks a lot.
All right. Thanks. Have a good one.
Thanks, Chase. Take care. All right. Where were we? Jared, do you want to talk about doc sprints at KubeCon now, and we'll talk about code sample formatting at the end. What's your job?
Yeah, I can do that. The doc sprint updates I have are it's more of just sort of a ping for ideas, and if people have great ideas, welcome to shout them out. Otherwise, if you want to sort of sit on them and stir a bit, we're not in a huge rush. Basically, we've been approved to give a doc sprint to host a doc sprint at KubeCon Tuesday, December 5th from 1 to 5. So we have a half day. We have a boardroom that seats 30. That may or may not be split between two rooms that are right next to each other. It's just seating's tight for that sort of space, and it was either a room that could seat 10, or 2 rooms that could seat 20 apiece, or a room that could seat 350 people. And I have a big ego, but I don't think I could fill a room with 350 people for this event. So that said, so we have space for 40 people or 30 people up to 40. If we need more, let me know. And is somebody? No. Okay. What else? There is a cost of renting the room, which I'm gonna see if CNCF will pick that up. It's not substantial. It's like $2,000. So I'm gonna work with them on that. If there's any ideas for themes for like a project that we can put forth that people who are attending the doc sprint can work on, I am all ears. So we do have 2 months to brainstorm this and figure this out. I know a lot of people here have run doc sprints before, so Radhika's run them. Andrew and I have done them before. Jennifer, you participated in many, so there's a lot of experience here. I think what we need is a good project idea that we can put out there for folks to work on. So if people have ideas, great. Let me know.
Awesome.
All I got.
That's a question for you from Jennifer. How many assistants do you have room for in the running the doc sprint?
I'm thinking 4 would be good. Especially if we're spread between 2 rooms. I'd like 2 people in each room. That makes a lot of sense to me. I'm open to more or less. I think 3 is the bare minimum I could get away with, though. If there are lots of people who are interested who wanted to attend, then I'm definitely open to more.
So Jared, like, how simple or complex do you want the task to be? Like at the Write the Docs, we did, people putting the pages into the template and that sort of thing, or doing some editing.
Yeah, the Write the Docs one was intentionally simple because the sort of on-ramp to Kubernetes is pretty steep. But the folks in this audience should be fairly technical. We could do something that's sort of a notch up on the technical ladder. I think it's, ideally whatever project we have would have, say, 30 to 40 issues related to it that's already chunked out that people can grab and work on. So I think similar to what we did at Write the Docs, we'd have the spreadsheets. People can claim items in the spreadsheet, start working on that particular item, reach out to us for questions. So I know that answer is pretty nebulous, but that's the best.
Because if you wanted something simple, I was going to say we have the glossary going out soon, but we could obviously use a lot more terms. We're just going to go out with like a minimal set. So if you wanted something, or we could have different complexity levels for people, but the lower one would be like people could work on, the definitions for key terms, and then that'd be pretty easy to submit, and then it would pop up on the glossary.
That might be a really good one to do. Why don't we see where we're at in a couple weeks on planning that, and that might be a good one. And if that's not big enough, we might tack on another project that's more technical for folks to work on. There are going to be a lot of new people who are just interested in Kubernetes who are going to be there, and then there's going to be a lot of more experienced folks. So, yeah, cool. I see a lot of people chipping in with ideas. So, if you could actually add your names to the doc, Zoom chat is super ephemeral. So, indicating your interest there. I don't have your contact info.
I'm opening an issue in GitHub so that we can start tracking this stuff more effectively.
That'd be great. We are going to be coming up on the 1.9 release when we get closer to that date. The KubeCon is I think it's pretty close to the 1.9 release. So just something to keep in mind if there was release note stuff that you want to work on or things like that. Also, if there's just folks in this room that want to hang out and chat and brainstorm ideas, it's always nice to meet in person. As wonderful as your virtual appearances are, it's always nice to sort of have that 3D interaction. So that's all I got. I'll do a quick little write-up of what we sort of very, very general what we want to do, and submit that so there can be a little blurb in the KubeCon packet about what we're doing.
I just put the shell.
Yeah, definitely, Radhika. I would love to do a usability test there while we have folks in the room who are interested in docs.
Ooh, usability testing. Yes, that would be lovely.
Mm-hmm. Sweet.
Okay, I opened a shell of an issue for tracking. Put the link in Zoom chat and put it in the meeting notes for the docs. So if you have ideas for the KubeCon sprint, or if you just want to register your interest, leave a note or leave a comment on the issue, and we can start tracking things from there. Anything more on KubeCon or doc sprints, Jared?
Nope, that's all I got. I'll be running a much smaller doc sprint at the Write the Docs one day event in Melbourne on November 25th. So I might do a much smaller set of issues there. That's going to be a half-day event, but it's going to be people who are fairly new, both to GitHub and to Kubernetes. So, Andrew, I might brainstorm with you about that sort of offline, but I'll let folks know.
Okay.
And there was I feel terrible saying this. There was a person from Red Hat who was here at the last meeting, and he voiced his interest in helping out with that. He's from Melbourne. He's from Australia. He lives in Brisbane, and I totally forget his name. He sent a chat to me that he was interested, but I lost it. Do you folks remember who that was?
Was that Chris Negus?
No, that was the other person from Red Hat, Andrew Burden.
Andrew Burden?
Burden, yes.
Do you happen to have his email?
Yes, I do. Just a second.
You can actually send it to me in chat, and I will actually make sure to grab it and put it somewhere where I will actually remember this.
Sounds good. Okay.
Thanks.
Okay.
One suggestion on the doc sprint. Instead of using spreadsheets, let's do what we did for leftover projects from the leftover work items from the migration, which is to create a GitHub project that serves as a collection of issues. We could do one of those for the November sprint, another one for the December sprint.
That sounds great, Steve. Good point. Yeah, let's get away from using tricks and spreadsheets for doing stuff. Yeah. All right, thanks.
Excellent. All right, moving on to code sample formatting. Over the past 24 hours or so, we've had a couple of issues opened and some discussion in the Sig Docs channel about how to format code samples in the docs. And right now, our style guide says omit the command prompt and separate commands from output. And there has been some interest from folks both in the channel and in PR submissions asking about whether it might not be better to include the command prompt in code samples. The style guide rule for that was before my time. I don't know why the style guide is that way. Does anybody who has memory of that decision want to talk about it?
Yeah, there were several reasons for that. One is that when people copy and paste, they get the $sign along with what they've copied and pasted in, and then that causes problems. Another is we were trying to be consistent with the style that we use in the Google Cloud Docs. There were probably other reasons, but it was fairly well discussed. I don't know, within the last year and a half, and that was the consensus at the time.
Okay.
No, there was, right before that, the Kubernetes engineering team had kind of come up with a style, which was to use the command prompt and show the output with no blank line in between. And the way you distinguished the actual command that you give from the output is that the command had the command prompt in front of it. And some of them are still using that style because it's just what they remember. And some of the docs still have that style because we just haven't gotten around to going through and trying to bring all the old docs into our current style guide. So that's kind of the history of it.
Thank you. Yeah, copy pasta seems pretty important. It's not really valuable if you have to go in and manually edit the paste results after pasting. It sort of defeats the purpose. Anybody want to make an argument in favor of changing the style guide to include prompts for the command line? Does anybody feel strongly enough about that to want to make a case in favor?
Can I interject? Well, I guess Nick is also speaking, but I think it's possible to get the best of both worlds. If you were following the Sig Docs channel, Misty, I think she's from Docker, she proposed using CSS and formatting in order to get the ability to both be able to copy and paste it really easily, but also still have the command prompt visible. I think that would just be like a little time investment of getting that sort of formatting set up, and then once you have that, you can apply it across all the code samples.
I'm going to second that. I think it's definitely important to make the readability paramount, because while it's great to be able to copy and paste, a primary purpose of the docs, at least I would think so, is to help people to understand what's actually going on. And if you can't tell what's going on, it's not as useful, in my view. That's my personal opinion. So, but I'm the new guy here, so take it for what it's worth.
Plus one to all that, I think, yeah, I would love that. I would love to have both. I would love to have the ability to copy and paste and the ability for it to clearly be called out as prompt.
I mean, we could do something simple like just make the command itself in bold, even, just as long as you can see what's happening. But one of the advantages of the command prompt is you can also indicate root versus not root. So,
Well, also, is there a way to add the functionality so you have the copy paste button so that will only copy the command itself? Because right now, I mean, that issue, the copy paste issue is because like they're manually copying and pasting it. Whereas if we had the button kind of like the way the YAML is, then we wouldn't have to worry about them necessarily copying the prompt and output along with the command.
That's a possibility.
That has been tried. We tried it in the Cloud Docs. I don't remember whether we succeeded. I remember it was kind of complicated, but I think there are ways.
Jessica, I am looking at the link that Misty posted yesterday in Sig Docs to style shell commands with CSS. Have you had the chance to play with or implement this at all?
I could probably do it if I set aside a day. I just haven't done it yet.
Sure.
And I also don't know if like Misty wants to take point on it, because if she's excited about it and like wants to start contributing to Sig Docs, that might be a good way, or like a good starter project. But like I think like it'll be easier to make a decision on this if there is a working prototype that everyone can look at and be like, oh, that makes sense, or that's intuitive. If that's something we want to discuss next meeting, I can try to cobble something together by then.
Yeah, that would be awesome. I'd love to see a prototype of what that could actually look like in our documentation. The discussion right now is kind of abstract. If we have something like concrete that we can look at and compare functionality with, that would be really helpful.
Okay.
So go ahead.
I was just saying, like, yeah, just having a deadline of next week would actually force me to do it. So
excellent. Jessica, you have a deadline 1 week from today.
So what I'd suggest is that in the prototypes, we show how we're going to show both the command and the output of the command and explain the output of the command. Because right now the style is you say, create the pod, then you show the command. Then you say something about the output. The output shows that, you created a pod with 2 containers, and then you show the output. If we're going to change that, let's decide how, if we're going to keep that or change it and build that into whatever prototype we put forward.
Sorry, I'm just taking notes really quick on command format, output format, and how command output will be explained.
Because that's quite different from showing the command and the output all in one block and saying something about it up front or after the whole thing, but not saying something in between showing the command and showing the output. Right now, that's our style, is you say something in between those 2 things.
Right.
I really like that idea, and I'll try to think of ways to make it more intuitive. So.
Awesome. All right, then let's continue this discussion at next week's meeting. And we'll take a look at the prototype, which thank you, Jessica, for taking that on. I think it will be really helpful to have something to look at. And I think that's it for what we have on the agenda. Any last minute items to discuss?
Yeah, there might be one more. Jennifer and Radhika, like we were talking about maybe making the release notes more prominent on like the Kubernetes.io website, or somehow presenting it so that people can see it better. Did you guys want to talk about that, or?
Sure. I left it off the release notes retrospective content because that kind of had two audiences. One of them was this group, and one of them was the larger release group, which I think we don't need to worry about them for this one. I mean, if I'm wrong about that, I can take it up there too. But yeah, I think it would be good to talk about.
Yeah, because you guys put a lot of work in the release notes, but right now it's just sort of a link from the Docs homepage to the GitHub location.
Well, to changelog.md, which I think I haven't even had time to go back and look. For 1.8, we were supposed to have implemented a single changelog for the current release and break out. I think the idea was just to break out everything else for previous releases, and then going forward have single changelogs for each subsequent release. But from what I see of the PRs, like I said, I haven't even gone in and looked at the implementation. That hasn't happened yet.
Right, but we also, like, if it is displayed on our site, we want it to be formatted better, right? Because right now it's just sort of that,
It's just a default mess. Yeah.
Yeah. So does anyone have any thoughts as to like maybe how to better present it on our website?
So let's talk about the formatting for a minute, because as I understand it, the fear was that we wouldn't get nice formatting. We'd get the formatting like we saw, say, in the 1.7 release notes. But we didn't. We got formatting that's more like what we would see in our own docs. It's just that it happens to be in changelog.md. So Jennifer, do you see it that way, or do you see it that we got formatting that's much less interesting than what we want?
It's real similar. I mean, the markup is the same. I don't know what the markup's been like in the past, but I can't imagine that there is a problem with the markup that Radhika and I worked from. All of it manual, and dumping that content into a page on the doc site. I don't see a technical issue.
Well, my question is, are you satisfied with the formatting that we see in changelog.md, or do you want it to be nicer looking?
The piece that I think that include the nicer, I want to define nicer looking. There's no decent navigation in that default GitHub repo view. And given how complex a Kubernetes release is, it seems to me that that alone is worth better presentation. Just making it possible. Now, this might mean that going forward, we rethink, sort of the strings that we use for headings and so forth to provide a decent TOC. But I think that breaking it up and making it more navigable would contribute significantly, I'll try to remove the adverbs, would contribute to the UX of the release notes.
Also, like if it were in one of our templates, like in our site, then it would be more part of our site and not just a link out, but then that would require maybe a little bit of automation where we, during the builds, we pull in that file and then we include it in some templated file that could, then help auto-generate the TOC and whatnot.
Right. The other thing that occurs to me, and I'll take 1 minute to chase a shiny thing and then stop. But conceivably being able to review it better in context with the rest of the docs would help us port actual documentation for subsequent releases when things move out of release mode. That's a kind of doc testing holy grail I keep working on as a side project and haven't gotten very far on. Just thought I'd call it out. It's more about thinking about the content. It's less about where the content actually lives.
So my idea was, so usually if you look at any product, you see like release notes is published along with documentation. Sometimes you see the download link within release notes. So my idea was have the release notes on the documentation side, and users can easily read through rather than looking at the long changelog.md where like you see download links and random tables, and then you scroll down and to see where exactly the release notes are. So my idea was like purge the release notes and publish it along with documentation site. But I'm not sure like how we could accomplish that, like what is the mechanics involved in that. So probably you would have like better ideas.
I'm not sure how to go forward with the discussion from there. How can we distill this into something actionable?
The first question is like, the currently release notes are in the feature branch, and do we need to copy? If we are copying, so it is a duplication, or are there any mechanism within the script, if there is a script to pull the content out from the feature branch and publish it on the documentation site, or there any better mechanism to do that? Because two writers have spent day and night, and like day before the release we have spent even night, so visiting and revisiting, editing, so it's lots of time went in. So I didn't know that it is going as a changelog.md. My idea, I saw a link within the community site, but I didn't know that.
Wait, sorry, one quick question. I know we're talking about tooling. What's the quality of the content that you're getting originally?
After from the engineering.
Yeah, like if you were to break down the percentages of your time from like verify, like getting the content, making sure the content is actually human readable and useful, to like getting to publishing the content on Kubernetes.io. Like what's the breakdown of that?
I thought it's like the content 60% and 40% is like editing and revisiting and filling in the gap, why, what, where.
Okay.
That was my idea. Jennifer, you would have your thoughts. What do you think?
I'm trying to figure out like what is the problem that's like eating up all of our time with this? Where are we feeling the most pain?
So I can speak to previous releases a bit. This is Caleb, by the way.
Sure, go ahead.
So in 1.6, 1.5, and 1.4, which I was a part of, there was somewhere around, because we only ever got really to the grouping of the release notes by component, and that took probably 30 hours or so of engineering time to just group the release notes that have been scraped from the pull requests, and before even doing the editing. And that required, experts in the entire project to properly categorize a pull request's release notes under a reasonable grouping by component.
So like how many hours of work is that?
That is like 30 to 40 hours of work.
So if like a writer just spent a week sitting down with every single feature, it would probably get a better result than trying to like do all this tooling and this sort of like machine that just barfs out content.
That has been my position. Looking at the release notes that are generally attached to a pull request or issue, they're generally not written from considering any persona. They're not generally written with a user or developer focus in mind. They're usually incredibly technical and usually need rework by a technical writer or some rounds of review with the contributor of that release note, which often will just, for lack of them, will fall onto the SIG lead, which is not great because they might not have enough context on that particular thing that's being documented.
Well, do they also have? It also seems like they lack the big picture context of like what does the actual end user care about who's reading the release notes.
It's possible too.
Whereas like every single feature is kind of weighted equally, and that is probably not how a user perceives every single feature.
That is very, very reasonable. Yeah.
All right. Yeah. Yeah, I didn't mean to interrupt you, Radhika. It's just like I felt like we were getting into a tooling conversation, but I feel like the quality of content conversation I don't know if we were pulling that in as well, because I see that I see a tension in both when it comes to the release notes. Like we're automating bad content, which then like leads to a lot of work for us. And I'm just trying to pull out what the right solution is.
1.7. Oh, sorry to jump in front of you, Radhika. 1.7 was the first time we did not pull the automatically generated release notes, and we relied primarily on the SIGs to highlight their own features. So this was new for 1.8. Sorry, where we didn't actually use the rel note script to scrape all this information down.
It's my understanding it was also the first release where you had any dedicated writers, let alone two of us.
Yes.
So we've got a bunch of different variables here. And I guess, trying to toss them all in at equal weight is, well, I'd rather not, which is one of the reasons why I tried to modularize my write-up. And I guess that until we have some data about how involving writers at different stages of the product can work, it might be useful to draw from experiences with other projects that have involved writers.
Actually, can we decide what our users reading this document want? That doesn't seem unreasonable, right? Like we have XML feeds on Google's side for all of our release notes, and that seems like it would be a really useful feature. It's not that hard to build in, but it's like what do our users want? Do we have a good idea of that?
I think Jace has a really firm idea in his mind of what the value is of these release notes. So as we go forward with this conversation, let's get his thoughts, because I know he felt very strongly that these needed to be correct for people who were, had a big cluster going and needed to understand what it would mean to upgrade to Kubernetes 1.8.
Oh yeah, I mean, like people read the release notes to make sure that their stuff isn't going to break.
Well, exactly. I mean, we know one thing that people read release notes for always, and that's breaking changes. I don't think we need bike shed that one.
Nope. It's more like what does a user want, and that doesn't need to be like a massive, in-depth, like quarter-long study. It really just needs to be like, what does Jace think? What does Brian Grant think? Like just pinging a few folks in a few different.
Yes. Exactly.
Keep that lightweight, but I'm worried that we're kind of fixing our problems instead of fixing our problems.
No, that's fair.
All right. I mean, I feel like we're talking about also two different stages of the process. Like one is like getting the release notes together, but then also I want to talk about like once that's done, like how do we present it on our site? Because the other question that came up when I was talking to them before was, do we want a dedicated area in the site that talks about like the actual releases and downloads and things like that? Because right now it seems kind of buried. Like a lot of other projects you go to, there'll be like a download tab or area, and then it says like where to get the binaries, and then also like the release notes and all that stuff. But we have it kind of split up right now.
Yeah, I mean that's a great point. I think that's what Radhika was getting to at the bottom. Andrew, that's excellent. Yeah, I think there's like two different bits of this problem. There's the the dual sourcing and how we're generating this content, where we're getting it from, and then there's the how do we serve it, what do our users need. So good point.
And it looks to me like the problem of where do we get the content has been solved. I think the way we did it in 1.8, which was to have people actually write, people, not scripts, write in that, what did we call that, the template? Anyway, there was one document where everybody would write their release notes. Then Jennifer and Radhika took it from there. And I think it was probably blended with a little bit of automatically pulling notes from PRs, but the idea is that the new way we're going to do it is not pull notes from PRs. We're going to have people write notes in this document. Then we will have editors work on them. I think really the only question that remains is how does it get built and presented to the public? Do we have one document that shows both a bunch of binary releases and known issues and release notes, or do we separate those out and have them in the docs website? I think that's the question at hand now. I mean, Caleb, if I'm off base on that, let me know.
No, that is mostly how I would categorize it.
Yeah.
So
Go ahead,
can I speak a little bit to why I wrote in favor of automation in my write-up? Because I did. And we've abandoned it without, I think, talking about what it could do with a writer involved. Caleb makes a good point in his comments in the doc that devs need to be encouraged to write up decent release note content. I don't want to say exactly in what form, but at the start of feature development. In other words, they ought to be able to describe what they're going to go away and code before they code it. Early and often is a good way to manage content of any sort. The problem with the single file that everybody contributed to up to and including the last possible minute, the last PR that went into the release was a release note PR. Now, admittedly, that one was a known issue, and that's okay. But we had other PRs coming in literally only hours before the final build. I would like to see a process in place that doesn't allow that. I don't imagine we'll get that for 1.9. But if we're serious about the quality of release notes, I mean, I think other things are going on with PRs besides just what's going on into the release notes if they're coming in that late. But sorry, getting a little sidetracked here. The larger issue has to do with so many hands so extensively in a single file. Git is not a good tool for serious editing. It's really not. And I deliberately stayed, for the most part, out of the release notes until a week ago yesterday, because I could see stuff coming in hot. Radhika was doing a good job of providing some, sort of copy editing in the individual PRs, but it was also clear that a lot more work was going to need to be done to organize the content, to sort it out, to actually explain what a feature was doing. I know. I can see Jared smiling. But if there's anything we can do in the way of process to get some of that content going and edited in the context of the features being developed before the 11th hour, that would be a good thing. And that's the larger goal I was working toward in my write-up.
Yeah, I think that's not a bad aspiration to work to. I mean, I'll disagree with some of the details around. Like,
we'll discuss that later. I mean, I actually need.
Yeah, that's totally out of scope. But I agree. I think like the more lead time we can get to write these up, and I think engineers, the people developing these features, actually explicitly defining what they're building before they give it to us and giving a clear rationale for it would be really useful for us. So
So one more thing I called out in the doc, because I don't know how many people on this call remember, but there was some discussion, I think in the Sig Docs Slack channel, maybe it was in one of these meetings, about starting to sort of farm out writers to individual SIGs. I actually have an invitation from SIG Apps because I wound up in a meeting with Ken Owens last week because I was trying to make sure I wasn't breaking things with the less than completely intelligible content that the Workloads API people provided us with. They provided a lot, but we didn't have time to go through rounds of PRs and edits. It was the quickest way to clean things up. And along the way, I got myself an invite to join the SIG because they would actually like the UX perspective of a writer. If we could start doing this kind of thing for other SIGs, maybe we could also start to solve some of these problems that we have been just discussing.
Yeah, and I think that is a fantastic idea. And I think there's been a similar proposal tossed around for having a release and PM representative on each SIG as well. I guess the way I've tried to think about this problem, to Jared's point, is trying to get as much of this information up front. So I've been working with Brian and Jace and Joe to work on a development process where we could try and grab some of this information earlier. And I would love to get people from Sig Docs involved in that, because I do think that once you are at implementation time, you should have probably already know what the release note should be at that point. And I guess I've yet to see information that would, a reasonable counterpoint to that belief. And so I do think starting earlier is important, and also to have a way of managing this in a distributed fashion, I think, is also important, because the SIG meetings are only once a week or once every 2 weeks, and there may not be time to synchronously do this kind of documentation work.
Absolutely. And there, I mean, asynchronously and at the level of the SIG is beautiful. It's when you try to do all the content in a single file, and with so very many hands in it, that things get ugly.
Okay, so I'm going to ask that we refocus a little bit and come back specifically to the topic of where we started out the conversation, which is whether to pursue automation for 1.9. What I'm hearing from everyone is that getting information earlier from feature developers is a great idea, but I'm not hearing a lot in favor of automation. And am hearing that 1.8, that the process of having writers seeking out and helping to develop content worked really well. So while we can talk, I would recommend that we do it in a different meeting because we're running a little short on time. But while there might be different ways to optimize how we get writers to work with feature development teams, it does sound like getting writers to work on release note creation rather than trying to automate or script generate release note content is going to be the way to go. Does that seem like an accurate and reasonable summary?
I'm going to actually kind of jump in and say I really think you need both, because while you do need the human interaction and the scripted solution isn't going to solve everything, again, I was here very late in the process, but it seems like there was a lot of chasing people down at the last minute and so on. And I think an automated solution could solve a lot of the problems of trying to get that information a lot earlier. So
one second. Thank you. Thanks, Jennifer, and take care. We'll see you around. Sorry, someone was starting to reply to Nick and I cut them off. Sorry, go ahead.
No, and I guess I don't disagree that at some point it would be nice to automate a lot of the documentation production workflow. I just don't think we are yet in a place where we have a process that we think is scalable enough and reasonable that we would want to automate. And I am, I guess, concerned about building automation that automates our bad processes today. At least that's why we in 1.8 just stopped using the automated scraping of PR notes. Now that the information wasn't available and that you couldn't use it, it just ended up being far more human effort to curate that automated content than the automated content that it was worth.
Exactly. That was.
I'll
sorry,
volunteer
Nick,
to.
Sorry. Just to concur very quickly, that was. There was some automation attempt. I recall there being some automation attempts early in 1.8, and that was part of the reason why there was a bit of a scramble at the end. Was if I'm recalling that correctly, that there was a scramble for basically undoing the results of questionable automation. And then until we get really clear about what it is that we're trying to automate, the best automation in the world isn't going to solve the fundamental problem of lack of clarity and lack of consistency. So I'm sorry, Nick, go ahead.
I was just saying I'm happy to volunteer to try and get a better process with or without automation in there. So
Awesome.
That's all I was going to say.
Oh, cool. Thank you. Yeah, that's whether we can eventually automate, whether automation makes sense or not. I don't think that's the highest priority question right now. I think getting to a place where we set clear expectations and are achieving consistent, where future developers are giving consistent information of a consistent quality sufficiently early in the process, then we can automate that. But until we get there, automation seems like the wrong thing to chase.
Yeah, at least that's my feeling. And I love automation, don't get me wrong. I mean, I've invested well over 100 hours doing this manually. But yeah, I just don't think we're here yet.
Okay, well, like I said, I will be happy to kind of see if I can do anything to make this better.
Yeah,
Awesome.
If you wanted to write on for the 1.9 release as one of the documentation writers, it at least helped me a lot in terms of thinking about kind of what I would like to see for a process.
Right. Yeah, I will do that.
Very cool. Thank you.
Yes, thanks.
All right. Yeah, comment from Ryan. Ryan J. +1 for setting expectations early regarding content and dates while engaging SIGs. Yes, plus 1,000. All right. Unless there's anything else to add, I'm going once, going twice. All right, that's the Sig Docs meeting.
All right, thanks a lot.
Thanks, everybody. Have a good week.